Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. We are back. I am so excited to be doing content again. And for those of you who don't know, I was gone because I was traveling and I had a few things to do for work. So while I was traveling, I hadn't played GBL in 2 weeks and I was so sure that I was going to come back to this game and drop like crazy because I was going to be really rusty. But about a week ago when I got back into GBL, so I did start playing GBL again at the beginning of last week, but unfortunately I got sick and I lost my voice, so I couldn't share any content with you guys. During that week, I had so much TINKATON content. There was another TINKATON team that was working out really well for me. That was Shadow Swampert on the lead with TINKATON and Shadow Galarian Weezing in the back, but like I said, I got sick and I couldn't share those battles with you guys. Otherwise, I would have another silent video. But anyways, when I got back into the game, I decided to just try to figure out the meta. I needed to see what were the most common Pokemon everyone was using and try to counter that. And for a while, I was hard stuck in the 2700s, not able to climb. But then I started recognizing that, hey, a lot of people are using Mudslap users, and the only way I am going to be able to counter those Mudslap users is if I run flyers, because I was trying to run water types. I was running double water, but the Mudslap users still countered those, because what water types am I going to use? Lapras, well, if I run into a Marowak, a Shadow Marowak, the Mudslaps are really going to hurt, and it also has Rock Slide that it can hit back with. If I run Feraligatr, the Shadow Marowak can just double shield and Mudslap me down. So I was really struggling against those Pokemon, and then a lot of people were also running Serperior in the back to counter those Mudslap users. So the only way I was going to get around that was if I ran double flyer. And I also really wanted to run TINKATON because, it's the new shiny Pokemon that everyone is trying to figure out. So I wanted to run that Pokemon as well. And when I put together this team, it took me 3 days to climb from the 2700s up to exactly 3000 ELO, and we hit Legend. So for today's video, I have tried to fit in as many battles as I could from my Legend run, featuring TINKATON on the lead with Shadow Dragonite and Mandibuzz in the back. Highly recommend this team. You won't be able to use this team in Great League Remix because the Mandibuzz is banned. Also, most of the ground types that I was struggling against are also banned in Great League Remix, so I don't know how this team would do in that cup, but I would highly recommend it for Open Great League. Basically, your lead TINKATON is going to be very good against the fairy types that your backline is going to be weak to. So TINKATON is going to be able to take care of the Azumarils, Wigglytuffs, Galarian Weezings. And you also want to use TINKATON as your answer to ice types. So up against a Dugong on the lead, I will soft lose with TINKATON. I'll go for a Play Rough on the first move. I won't be able to reach a second Play Rough, but I will be able to go for a Heavy Slam. TINKATON with Heavy Slam also does a pretty decent amount of damage to a Alolan Sandslash. So you see, in this game, we were up against an Alolan Sandslash, but I was able to land a Heavy Slam and do quite a bit of damage to that Pokemon. So you would think this entire team is very weak to Alolan Sandslash, but there are several examples in this video where I can handle that Pokemon. Now, the recommended moveset for TINKATON used to be Heavy Slam and Play Rough on PvPoke, but I just checked again and it seems like they changed it from Heavy Slam to Bulldoze. So I would say you could run it with either one. I ran it with Heavy Slam. I needed Heavy Slam for the crit release that I was seeing, and also because TINKATON is my fairy type answer. So I preferred Heavy Slam. It's still going to hit for neutral against the ice types, but Bulldoze is going to be a little bit better against Clodsire and Alolan Sandslash, which are two Pokemon that this team does struggle quite a bit against. Now, one thing that might annoy some of you guys about this team is that it doesn't really have a save swap Based on what I see in the lead and what I lose lead to, I will swap out into one of my back Pokemon. So if my opponent has a Mudslapper on the lead, I will usually bring in Mandibuzz. But if I see a Talonflame on the lead, I'll bring in Dragonite because I noticed that a lot of Talonflame leads are going to have Serperior and Morpeko in the back, and I would much rather bring out Dragonite because if I bring in Mandibuzz, the Mandibuzz is going to draw out the Morpeko and I'm just going to get destroyed. And one final thing you guys need to know about this team before I stop rambling and get into the battles are its biggest weaknesses, which are going to be Clodsire, Alolan Sandslash, and both of the Stunfisks. I think this is where Bulldoze would come in more handy on the Tinkaton, but those Pokemon did give me a little bit of a hard time. With a Clodsire lead, I will try to catch an Earthquake. Unfortunately, in this game, I failed to call when my opponent was going to throw the Earthquake, so I do end up losing this game. But keep that in mind, those Pokemon are a little bit difficult to deal with, but they're not impossible. Oh, and one more thing, and then I promise we are going to get into the battles after this, but you'll notice that my Tinkaton has Egg Hatch IVs, and that's because I was just so excited to have been able to hatch one of these while I was traveling. I did not care about the IVs on it. I am not going to sit around and wait for people to come and trade me one. I just went ahead and built it. You know, I want to have fun. It ended up working, so if you have one, I would just say go ahead and build it and have fun with it. It's not an expensive Pokemon to build. You'll notice actually that a lot of my Pokemon don't have the best PvP IVs, and that's because I'm the type of person who's like, oh, if I have it, I'm just gonna make it. Alright, I am going to stop rambling now. Let's get into these battles. We have quite a bit to go through. In this first game, we are up against a Talonflame on the lead, and this is where I learned that against Talonflame lead, I should not swap into Mandibuzz. I do believe that this ends up being a loss. I immediately recognized that this team was going to have Serperior in the back, and I just needed to save both of my shields for my Dragonite, but Dragonite is not going to be able to handle both the Serperior and the Talonflame anymore because Talonflame is going to do a pretty decent amount of damage with the Incinerates to our Dragonite here. So yeah, my opponent brings in the Talonflame. I'm going to go for a Dragon Claw, which of course my opponent is going to go ahead and shield. And they are going to be able to reach 2 flies on Talonflame to take both of our shields. So now with both of my shields out of the way, the Serperior will be able to come in and just go for an Aerial Ace to take our Dragonite out. And one Dragon Claw is not going to be enough to take this thing out because Serperior is pretty bulky, so I'm just going to go for it anyways here. I just want to see how low I can get it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and surrender because there was no way I was going to win that. Alright, now moving on to the next battle. Against Dugong, I will stay in with my Tinkaton and I won't shield anything. I'll go for the Play Rough as soon as I get it because it is going to be on good move timing, and also I need to go for it before my opponent potentially debuffs me, although in this matchup they just go for Drill Run. And here I was able to reach another Play Rough because I think my opponent paused for a move to see if I was going to catch. So I was able to sneak in an extra Fairy Wind, but usually I will only be able to make it to a Play Rough and a Heavy Slam, and then I can come in with my Mandibuzz and Air Slash them down. So it looks like my opponent is going to have a Talonflame in the back. I bring in my Mandibuzz and I weaken them a little bit, and then I swap out into my Dragonite. I was able to get a shield from them, which is really nice, but I am going to have to give up both of my shields here because my opponent is able to reach 2 flies, and their final Pokemon is a Serperior. So I was telling you guys I was seeing so many Serperiors in the back, which is why this entire team was able to work so well for me because everything on this team just absolutely destroys Serperior. We're able to Dragon Breath their Talonflame down and take that win. In the next battle, we are going to be up against the biggest core breaker for this team, which is that Unova Stunfisk. I kind of have to stay in here because if I swap out into my Dragonite and my opponent has a decent Dragonite answer in the back, then this Stunfisk is going to be aligned to our Air Slash Mandibuzz, and we do not want that. So I stay in with my Tinkaton. I go for a Play Rough to weaken the Stunfisk, And then I'm just hoping that my Dragonite and my Mandibuzz are going to be able to handle whatever my opponent has in the back. And we get super lucky. My opponent brings in a Primeape. I am going to go for a Dragon Claw to get a shield out of the way. And then we're able to fully Dragon Breath the Shadow Primeape down. And my opponent's final Pokemon is a Serperior. I just need to get their final shield out of the way before bringing in Mandibuzz, because if I could get that shield out of the way, then I can land a Dark Pulse on the Stunfisk. So I go ahead and I catch the move from the Serperior, and all I need to do here is reach a Dark Pulse. 2 discharges is not going to be enough to take the Mandibuzz out either way. My opponent isn't going to make it to 2. They can make it to 1, and then we reach that Dark Pulse, take that Stunfisk out, and all I have to do here is survive whatever my opponent is going to throw from Serperior. It's not going to be enough to KO our Mandibuzz. We go for an Aerial Ace to take that Grass Snake out, and we take another win. Unfortunately, in this next match, we are not going to be as lucky. We are up against a Corviknight on the lead, which I immediately have to swap out of. I go into Mandibuzz and we draw out the Azumarill, which is good. At least Azumarill isn't going to be aligned to our Dragonite, right? But my opponent is going to end up switching out of the Azu before we can take it out. So here I'm just trying to weaken it as much as I can with the Air Slashes and the Aerial Aces. This Ice Beam is going to KO our Mandibuzz. And then I come back in with TINKATON, and my opponent has saved that Azu in the back, which is really, really not good for me. They are going to end up taking both of our shields here, and I should have just gone for the superpower to take this Corviknight out, but I go for a Dragon Claw because my opponent had 2 shields left. I was really hoping that they would shield this Corviknight, but nope. We end up giving up both of our shields, and then here I really needed to go for a catch on the Ice Beam, but I was trying to call when my opponent was going to throw it. They end up throwing it immediately, and I'm just going to go ahead and top left because their final Pokemon is a Shadow Marowak. So unfortunately, I couldn't align the Marowak to one of my flyers, and we just end up losing that. But either way, that is still another positive set with this team, and we are slowly making our way to the 2900s. But in the next match, we get the team that I am absolutely prepared for. Immediately, my opponent is going to swap out of their Wigglytuff into a Shadow Marowak. And whenever you see Shadow Marowak on this team, just swap into your Shadow Dragonite and double shield. I cannot afford to take a Rock Slide. Most of the time, they are going to bait with a Bone Club on the first move. But either way, I don't mind double shielding because against TINKATON, Wigglytuff isn't going to be able to do much. And if my opponent has a Gastrodon in the back, which they do, then I don't really need shields for Mandibuzz. It gets a little bit tricky if my opponent's final Pokemon is a Drifblim, because Drifblim is going to be able to hit for super effective with the Icy Winds. But either way, when you see this team, you see the Wigglytuff on the lead, be prepared to swap into Dragonite unless your opponent swaps out into a Drifblim, because the most common teams with Wigglytuff lead are going to be Wigglytuff double Mudslapper or Wigglytuff, Marowak, and Drifblim. This next battle is a really nice one. We get the Azumarill on the lead. Now, in a previous set, when I was in the 2700s, I got Hydro Pumped, unfortunately, but I still think I managed to win that game either way. But most Azumarills are not going to be running Hydro Pump, so you can go ahead and no shield the TINKATON. Unfortunately, here it looked like my opponent was going to be able to farm our TINKATON down, so I do swap out into my Mandibuzz, and I end up taking an Ice Beam from their Azu, but then my opponent swaps out into a Shadow Annihilate. We will be able to live this Rage Fist and Air Slash the Annihilate down, and I have a move stored on my Mandibuzz, but I'm going to go ahead and swap out immediately into my Dragonite. Okay, my opponent's final Pokemon is a Corsola, which is really not good for me because they will be able to astonish our Shadow Dragonite down. But if I could get both of their shields out of the way, then I can land a move from my Mandibuzz onto this Corsola. But I know that my opponent is probably going to try to catch here, so I do 1 Air Slash. We managed to take the 1 HP Azu out that they had left in the back, and then I can go for that Dark Pulse, take the Corsola out, and take that win. Alright, now moving on to the next battle, we are going to be up against another Talonflame on the lead. Let's see what happens when I swap into Dragonite. My opponent is staying in, so I really thought this was going to be Morpeko and Superior in the back, but it ends up being a Guzzlord. They could have just brought in Guzzlord immediately to take our Dragonite out, but we managed to take both of their shields here. This is really good for me. I can come in with my TINKATON and go for a full farm down against this Guzzlord and come out of that with so much energy. I will be going for a play rough here against the Talonflame. It's not going to be enough to take them out, but it will weaken them to a point where I can come in with Mana Buzz now and go for a farm down. Now I did decide to shield the move from the Talonflame against my Mana Buzz, just in case it was a Brave Bird, and it looks like my opponent's final Pokemon is a Lapras. Okay, the Talonflame is no longer a threat because it is very, very low HP and it doesn't have energy. But this Lapras is going to be a little bit tricky to deal with, but it doesn't look like they are running Ice Beam. It looks like they are running Skull Bash. 2 is enough to take our Mana Buzz out, but I should be able to live a Sparkling Aria on our TINKATON and go for a full farm down on the Lapras to come out of that with energy for the Talonflame. I go for the Heavy Slam immediately when my opponent brings that Talonflame in. We take the Lapras out and we take that win. But in the next battle, I am going to play like an absolute noob and I am going to get my butt kicked. Now we are up against a Shadow Drapion on the lead. I'm going to go for Heavy Slam because I need 2 moves to take this thing out anyways, so I'm just going to go for 2 Heavy Slams. But here, I decide I'm going to catch the next move on my Mana Buzz, but me and my opponent both end up swapping out at the same time, so now it is going to be Mana Buzz up against their Azumarill, which is really unfortunate. Either way, it was looking like I was going to have my Mana Buzz aligned to their Azumarill because my opponent would have been able to farmer TINKATON down, and I definitely do not want to bring in Dragonite for this Pokemon. So I have to come in with Mana Buzz. Hopefully with this Azumarill out of the way, then my Dragonite should be free in the back. But here, for some reason, I go for a Heavy Slam instead of a Play Rough, and their Azumarill ends up living. And unfortunately for me, my opponent has a Jumpluff in the back with 2 shields left. I am not going to be able to take this out. My opponent will be able to reach 3 Aerial Aces for our Dragonite, so I am going to lose this. I'm going to go for a Dragon Claw here, but it's not going to matter because they have a shield left. They'll be able to reach that Aerial Ace, and this will be enough to take us out. Unfortunately for me, my opponent is going to win that with all 3 Pokemon still alive. But moving on to the next battle, it looks like we are going to have a pretty decent lead with Shadow Jumpluff on the lead. Now, the acrobatics do hurt TINKATON quite a bit, unfortunately, and I think 2 is not enough to take us out, but it is enough to get us really low. I will be able to go for a Heavy Slam here, however, and this should be enough to take them out. Yes, so I need a Play Rough, and then I have to go for a Heavy Slam because I'm not going to be able to reach a Play Rough before my opponent can reach a second acrobatics. Now, my opponent brings in a Shadow Drapion, but I swap out immediately into my Mana Buzz, and I should not have done this because their final Pokemon is a Morpeko. I would have much preferred to have my Dragonite aligned to their Morpeko, but I am going to come in with TINKATON here just to take the energy from the Morpeko. That way I can come in with Dragonite and go for a full farm down without taking a single move from the Morpeko. And then I have 2 shields left for this Drapion. I will be able to double shield my Dragonite, Dragon Breath the Drapion down, and take that win. Thank goodness. That is going to be another 4-1 with this team, and this 4-1 is going to get us into the 2900s for the first time this season. I did not think that on this day I was going to reach Legend, but we do end up doing very well in the next few sets. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a fellow member of the PvP community, and they have a Claydol on the lead. I swap out immediately into my Dragonite, and we managed to reach the Dragon Claw. They let it go, and now their Claydol is in a range where I can go for a move from TINKATON, and it might be enough to KO. So my opponent does swap out here into a Morpeko, but they go for a Psychic Fangs, which I know I am going to survive, and I make it to a Dragon Claw, so I can take a shield from my opponent. Now here my plan is to not shield the first move that my opponent is going to throw, but I am going to have to shield the Aura Wheel here. So my opponent is going to go for that. And I know that with an energy lead, I will be able to take the Claydol out because remember, they took a lot of damage from our Shadow Dragonite. So I will be able to reach 2 Heavy Slams. The second one is enough to KO, and my opponent's final Pokemon is a Credilli. I'm just going to throw the Heavy Slam as soon as I get it. Not throwing on good move timing. I just want to get that damage off. We get them into the yellow. It is super effective, and this is where we absolutely needed Heavy Slam. As soon as my opponent sees the Mandibuzz in the back, they go ahead and they top left. I believe Mandibuzz would have been able to survive 2 Rock Tombs from the Credilli. Okay, moving on to the next battle. I think we do struggle in this battle quite a bit. We were up against a Malamar on the lead, and unfortunately for me, my opponent swaps out into a Blastoise, and they shield our first Play Rough. I really need to weaken this Blastoise before swapping out into one of my back Pokemon, so I am going to stay in and go for another Play Rough, and then I will swap out into my Mandibuzz. Now, the rollouts are going to be doing super effective to both of the Pokemon that I have in the back, and here I should be able to go for a full Air Slash down, but then my opponent swaps out into a Diggersby and my Mandibuzz is in the yellow. I probably should have shielded one of the Hydro Cannons. If I knew my opponent was going to have a Diggersby in the back, then I would have been in a much better position here. But unfortunately for me here, I have to bring in my Dragonite, and I will have to shield one of the Fire Punches, let one of the other Fire Punches go, and I know that their Malamar is going to be able to come in and basically Psy-Wave our Dragonite down. They even let one of the Dragon Claws go, but they're able to take us out, and I have no health left on my TINKATON or on my Mandibuzz, so my opponent is going to take that win. I should have just shielded one of the Hydro Cannons on Mandibuzz. Moving on to the next battle, we have seen this before, a Wigglytuff lead with an immediate swap into Shadow Marowak. I am going to bring in my Dragonite just in case my opponent has a Drifblim in the back, and also Dragonite can more reliably deal with the Marowak than Mandibuzz, because Mandibuzz is going to have to go for charged moves, whereas Dragonite just can Dragon Breath that Marowak down. I will be able to go for a superpower against the Wigglytuff, and now the Wigglytuff is no longer a threat. Their final Pokemon is a Gastrodon. As soon as they see the Mandibuzz, they go ahead and they top left. And the next team we see is a similar situation where I hard counter my opponent. They have a Shadow Pidgeot on the lead, swap out immediately into a Gastrodon, and I'm going to bring in Mandibuzz. I prefer Mandibuzz against Gastrodon because the Body Slams are actually going to hurt Dragonite, whereas against Mandibuzz, I can come out of this with so much energy, and I will be able to handle this Gastrodon. So you know how this match goes. We are going to have to take a Body Slam here. This was a CMP tie, so I don't have to take another Body Slam. And we take that Gastrodon out. I will also be able to reach a move on the Pidgeot, throwing on terrible timing there. My bad, guys. But then my opponent swaps out into an Annihilate, a Shadow Annihilate, and I have 2 shields left for my Dragonite. So I'm just going to come in here, go for a full farm down. I even have a shield left. All I had to do was invest 1 shield for that Rage Fist, and my opponent just gives up. They let the Dragon Claw go. We take that Pidgeot out, take that win, and that is going to be another 4-1 for us, getting us to the 2,960s. Now, all I need is another 4-1 to reach Legend. Will we be able to get that 4-1 in the next set? Well, the answer was no. I did go 2-3 in the next set, but for some reason I only lost 1 point for that 2-3. So I still needed another 4-1 in this next set that I am going to show you guys. I'm not going to show you guys 2-3 only because we already have so many battles in this video. But in this next battle, we were up against a Shadow Alolan Sandslash on the lead, so a huge core breaker for the team. But we landed a Heavy Slam on it. It did so much damage, and then my opponent caught the next Heavy Slam on a Shadow Marowak. Because they caught the Heavy Slam on the Marowak, I was able to come in with my Dragonite, Dragon Breath the Marowak down before they could reach a Rock Slide, and then I was able to go for a move against their Alolan Sandslash, take a shield from them, come back in with TINKATON, and I did decide to use my final shield on TINKATON. We get very lucky because my opponent's final Pokemon is a Gastrodon. Because the body slams are not hurting our Mandibuzz a lot, I was going to go for a full farm down against the Gastrodon, but then my opponent swaps out here back into their Alolan Sandslash. I managed to take their final shield, go for a Heavy Slam on the TINKATON to take that Alolan Sandslash out, and then my opponent just goes ahead and top lefts because I was going to be able to take their Gastrodon out with my TINKATON. Moving on to the next battle, we are going to struggle a lot against this Clodsire, but I do manage to catch the Earthquake on our Mandibuzz, so that's good. Did I invest a shield? No, I have not invested a shield in the Clodsire and TINKATON matchup. My opponent swaps out into a Feraligatr. I decide to shield the Ice Beam because I really need to get rid of this Feraligatr. They let the Dark Pulse go, but unfortunately for me, my opponent is able to reach another Ice Beam and I have to let it go. Still, we get the Feraligatr out of the way and my opponent brings that Clodsire back in. Okay, I really don't want them to farm me down, so I swap out into TINKATON. Not great. And I really want to save my final shield for my Dragonite. It looks like my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Diggersby. I go for a Play Rough here, and I manage to take a shield from them. I'm able to reach another move as well, which is just going to be that Heavy Slam. Now, unfortunately, even though I have a shield left and my opponent has a shield left, Diggersby is very bulky, and they are going to be able to spam out those Fire Punches. I do decide to shield one of the Fire Punches here. I'm going to go for a Dragon Claw, expecting my opponent to shield, of course. And here, I really wish I had gone for a catch on one of the Fire Punches, but again, I was trying to call when my opponent was going to throw it, but we just end up losing this. It was just terrible. That Diggersby is just terrible for Dragonite because of how bulky it is. Even though Dragonite technically walls it, the quick attacks are going to start adding up, so are the Fire Punches. So getting that loss early on in the set was not great. However, in the next battle, we were up against a Shadow Drapion on the lead, but my opponent swapped out into a Golisopod, probably attempting to catch a Heavy Slam or a Bulldoze on the Golisopod. But I do manage to go for a Play Rough. I was really hoping that my opponent would shield. They don't shield. They let it go on Golisopod, and then I come in with my Mandibuzz, and I go for a full Air Slash down. Now I have quite a bit of energy for this Drapion. I can go for 2 Aerial Aces against it, and I even get a shield from them. I'm going to come back in with TINKATON. I know that I should be able to survive at least 2 Aqua Tails. Yeah, we can comfortably survive 2 Aqua Tails from this Drapion. And then I swap out, I blind swap into my Shadow Dragonite. My opponent's final Pokemon is a Shadow Jumpluff, but lucky for me, I have 2 shields left. My opponent has 1 shield, so I can go ahead and double shield here. I will be able to go for a full farm down against this Jumpluff, and I'm not going to be able to Dragon Breath their Drapion down with my Dragonite, but we are going to get them into a range where 1 Fairy Wind from our TINKATON is enough to KO, and we take that win. Moving on to the next battle, when I saw the Malamar on the lead there, I got scared because if they have Toxapex in the back, then it could be a really, really big issue for my team. Toxapex is super bulky and it's pretty difficult for me to handle, especially with TINKATON not having access to that Bulldoze on my team. But my opponent swaps out into a Lapras, which is really interesting. I do decide to stay in because I want to weaken the Lapras before swapping out into my Mandibuzz. I shield here just in case it's an Ice Beam, but my opponent goes for a Sparkling Aria. And then I go for an Aerial Ace, but they end up double shielding their Lapras. So with shields out of the way, I should be in a good position here. Unfortunately, I do have to take another Sparkling Aria, and I absolutely have to save at least one shield for my Dragonite because I still have no idea what my opponent could have in the back. But they bring that Malamar back in. I'm able to go for 2 Dark Pulses, but it's not going to be enough to take them out, which is so annoying. And then I come in with TINKATON really hoping that I could somehow snipe the Malamar, which was such a bad play because my opponent is able to come in with their Grumpig and farm our TINKATON down. And here, I know that they are going to reach a move on Malamar for our Dragonite, but I have to shield the Shadow Ball to take this Grumpig out. Now my opponent is going to go for the move, but can they reach another one? They can't. We're able to Air Slash them down with our Mandibuzz and take that win. I almost threw that game. And now we have reached the final battle of the video. I just need one more win to get a 4-1 in this set and potentially reach Legend. We get so lucky in this game because my opponent leads low kicks. They swap out into a Shadow Drapion, and they have a Shadow Skuntank in the back. Now here I do let this Aqua Tail go. I should be able to go for the Play Rough either way. We survive with very little HP, and I just let TINKATON go. I know that my backline should be able to handle the low kicks that I saw in the lead. I'm just hoping that Dragonite and Mandibuzz are going to be good against whatever my opponent has in the back. It ends up being that Shadow Skuntank, and thank goodness my opponent brings it in here because I know that my Dragonite is going to struggle against low kicks because the Sucker Punches are going to start adding up, but Mandibuzz should be really good against that low kicks. So we can take the crunch here. My opponent has no shields left, so this Aerial Ace is going to land, and an X-Scissor is going to hurt, but Mandibuzz is super bulky and should be able to survive, and I even have a shield left. And with that, we got the final win that we needed to get the 4-1, and we get 3,000 ELO on the dot. I honestly was not expecting to reach Legend as quickly as I did after I got back from my travels. I was fully expecting myself to drop like crazy. But that is going to be the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye bye!